Late 1943, Bad Zwischenahn airfield, northern Germany. A crisp autumn morning. Oberleutnant Josef Pöhs straps into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Me 163. He is a 43 victory ace, one of the Luftwaffe's finest pilots, and today he will test the most revolutionary aircraft ever built, a rocket fighter, the only one in the world. The Walter motor ignites with a thunderous roar. 2,000 pounds of thrust slam Pöhs back into his seat as the tiny bat-winged aircraft accelerates down the runway. The takeoff dolly, a crude wheeled cart that drops away after liftoff, bounces once on a rough patch of concrete. Then it bounces again, harder, and this time it strikes the belly of the climbing aircraft. Something ruptures. The engine cuts out at 300 feet. Pöhs has seconds to react. He banks hard, trying to circle back to the field, but the aircraft clips a radio antenna and cartwheels into the ground. Rescue crews led by Major Wolfgang Spater, Pöhs' closest friend, race to the overturned wreck. What they find will haunt Spate for the rest of his life. The crash has ruptured a fuel line, and the oxidizer, a chemical called T-Stoff, has leaked over the unconscious pilot. Spate later wrote that Pöhs' entire right arm had been dissolved. The other arm, as well as the head, was nothing more than a mass of soft jelly. T-Stoff was 80% hydrogen peroxide. It could strip flesh from bone in seconds, and every Me 163 carried over 1,000 litres of it, in tanks positioned directly behind and beside the pilot's head. This is the story of the Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet, the only rocket-powered fighter ever to see combat, and why the truth is more terrifying than the legend. Because this aircraft didn't just kill its enemies, it dissolved its own pilots alive, and somehow men still volunteered to fly it. The Me 163 occupies a strange place in aviation mythology. In the popular imagination, it represents the pinnacle of German wonder weapon engineering, a revolutionary aircraft that arrived too late to change the war, but pointed the way toward the future. The standard narrative suggests that with more time and resources, rocket fighters could have swept Allied bombers from the skies. The numbers tell a different story. Between July 1944 and April 1945, approximately 370 Komets were built. They were deployed to defend Germany's most vital synthetic fuel plants from the 1,000 bomber raids that were strangling the Reich. These aircraft could climb to 32,000 feet in under 3 minutes. They could reach speeds of nearly 600 miles per hour, roughly 200 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. On paper, they should have been devastating. In 9 months of combat operations, the Me 163 scored 9 confirmed kills. 9. Meanwhile, the aircraft killed more of its own pilots and ground crew than enemies it destroyed. The fuel that made its impossible performance possible was so dangerous that ground crews were forbidden from bringing the 2 propellant trucks within 800 meters of each other. Pilots joked grimly that returning from a mission with fuel still in the tanks was more dangerous than facing the American escorts. If you're finding this interesting, hit subscribe. The Komet story only gets stranger from here. To understand how Germany built an aircraft that was simultaneously revolutionary and suicidal, we need to go back to the sailplane clubs of 1920s Germany and a visionary engineer named Alexander Lippisch. Lippisch was obsessed with tailless aircraft. In 1909, as a teenager in Munich, he had watched Orville Wright demonstrate powered flight over Tempelhof Field. The experience transformed him. By 1925, he was director of a glider research organization, building experimental aircraft without horizontal tails. The idea was elegant. Eliminating the tail removed drag and weight. But it created a stability problem. Lippisch solved it by sweeping the wings backward, positioning the center of pressure behind the center of gravity. His Delta series aircraft through the 1930s proved the concept worked. On June 11th, 1928, one of his designs made history. A tailless glider fitted with 2 solid fuel rockets lifted off from Wasserkuppe, piloted by Fritz Staymer. It was the world's first manned rocket-powered aircraft flight. Lippisch had proven that rockets and swept wings could work together. A decade later, his research caught the attention of the German Air Ministry. What had begun as theoretical exploration became a weapon program. The design that would become the Me 163 featured 23 degrees of wing sweep, fixed leading-edge slots that made the aircraft virtually impossible to spin, and a shape so compact that the entire fighter was smaller than a Spitfire's wing. The production, Me 163B, was just 5.84 meters long with a 9.33 meter wingspan. It weighed 4,110 kilograms fully loaded. The airframe itself was docile, responsive, a glider pilot's dream. The problem was what powered it. The Walter HWK 509A rocket motor generated up to 1,700 kilopons of thrust, which translates to roughly 17 kilonewtons. It weighed only 100 kilograms. It could push the Komet from a standing start to over 500 miles per hour in under a minute. On July 6, 1944, test pilot Heini Dittmar reached 1,130 kilometers per hour in a specially modified Komet, a speed no turbojet aircraft would match until 1953. But the Walter motor was a chemical bomb waiting to detonate. The engine ran on two propellants. T-Stoff was the oxidizer, 80% concentrated hydrogen peroxide stabilized with trace phosphoric acid. C-Stoff was the fuel, a nightmare mixture of 57% methanol, 30% hydrazine hydrate, and 13% water. Each substance was lethal on its own. Together they were hypergolic, meaning they ignited spontaneously on contact. No spark required, no ignition system needed. Just bring them together and they exploded. Lippisch himself described what T-Stoff could do. If you stick your finger in it, he warned, then you get only the bone out. The chemical reacted violently with any organic material, decomposing into superheated steam and pure oxygen at temperatures approaching 500 degrees Celsius. It could only be stored in aluminium or PVC containers. Contact with copper, iron, lead, or any organic substance triggered catastrophic decomposition. C-Stoff was equally treacherous. The hydrazine hydrate was toxic and carcinogenic. Unlike T-Stoff, C-Stoff corroded aluminium, which meant the two propellants required completely different handling equipment. Ground crews color-coded everything. T-Stoff trucks were painted white, C-Stoff trucks were painted yellow, but both liquids were colorless, making deadly mix-ups possible. One incident became legend among the Komet units. A ground crewman poured T-Stoff into a container holding residual C-Stoff. Before he realized the magnitude of his mistake, as historian William Green recorded, his remains had been spread thinly over the entire test shed. The Me-163B carried approximately 1,160 litres of T-Stoff in tanks, positioned directly behind and beside the cockpit, plus 492 litres of C-Stoff in the wings. Total propellant weight approached 2,200 kilograms, more than the aircraft's empty weight. Every Komet pilot sat inches away from enough reactive chemicals to dissolve a human body in seconds. Jagdgeschwader 400, the world's first and only rocket fighter unit, formed on February 1, 1944, at Brandis Airfield near Leipzig. Their mission was to defend the Leuna Synthetic Fuel Works, the largest producer of aviation gasoline in Germany. The unit's commander, Major Wolfgang Spater, was a 99 victory Eastern Front ace and pre-war gliding champion. He understood the Komet's potential better than almost anyone. He also understood its limitations. The Walter motor burned through its propellants at a rate of nearly 5 kilograms per second. Total powered flight time was approximately 7.5 minutes. That was enough to climb to bomber altitude and make one, perhaps two attack passes before becoming a glider. The armament was two Rheinmetall Borsig Mk 108 30mm cannons, one in each wing root with 60 rounds per gun. The Mk 108 was devastating. Its shells packed 85 grams of RDX explosive, and 3 or 4 hits could destroy a B-17. But the cannon's slow muzzle velocity of just 540 meters per second meant the shells dropped significantly over distance. At the Komet's closing speeds, this created an almost impossible gunnery problem. In a tail chase, the combined closure rate might be 340 miles per hour. Head-on, it exceeded 800. Pilots had 2 to 3 seconds of firing time per pass. The Smithsonian's assessment was blunt. The Komet's high speed, coupled with the cannon's slow rate of fire and short range, made effective gunnery nearly impossible. The first major engagement came on August 16, 1944. Nearly 1,100 B-17s and B-24s passed near Brandis, escorted by hundreds of P-51s. 3 Komet pilots, Lieutenant Hartmut Rill, Feldwebel Herbert Strasnicki, and Feldwebel Siegfried Schubert, each claimed a B-17. The results were mixed. At least one damaged bomber limped back to England, and Rill became the first Komet pilot killed in action when P-51s of the 359th Fighter Group caught him during his unpowered descent. Lieutenant Colonel John Murphy closed to 1,000 feet and opened fire. His wingman reported that the entire canopy seemed to dissolve on the enemy aircraft, and the pilot was surely killed. This would become the pattern. The Komet's speed made it nearly invincible during powered flight, but the moment the rocket burned out, the pilot became a sitting duck. August 24th, 1944 was the Comet's finest day. Feldwebel Siegfried Schubert led pairs of Comets above 36,000 feet, then dived on formations of the 92nd and 457th bomb groups. With what one account describes as just 3 shots of his 2 Mk-108s, he cleanly separated the entire tail section of a flying fortress. Schubert destroyed 2 B-17s that day. Lieutenant Hans Bott confirmed a third. 3 confirmed kills in a single engagement. It would never happen again. On October 7th, 1944, during a mass scramble of up to 20 Comets, Schubert scored his 3rd overall confirmed kill against a 457th Bomb Group B-17. Then, on his 2nd sortie of the day, his combustion chamber caught fire during takeoff. The aircraft cartwheeled and disintegrated. Siegfried Schubert, the top-scoring rocket fighter pilot in history, died with 3 kills to his name. The Comet's danger to its own crews was not metaphorical. The landing system, which used a jettisoned wheeled dolly for takeoff and a retractable belly skid for landing, was inherently hazardous. The unsteerable, unsprung dolly had to separate cleanly during the takeoff roll. If it bounced back and struck the aircraft, as in Pöhs' case, the consequences were catastrophic. Landing on the belly skid transmitted impact forces directly to the pilot's spine. All 3 principal test pilots suffered serious spinal injuries. Heini Dittmar broke his 5th thoracic vertebra in a hard landing and spent up to 2 years hospitalized. Rudolf Opitz suffered similar injuries. Hanna Reitsch, the famous German aviatrix, sustained 6 skull fractures and a displaced jawbone when her dolly refused to separate in October 1942, sending her into a ploughed field at stalling speed. Any landing with residual propellant was potentially fatal. Mano Ziegler, a Comet pilot who later wrote a memoir, documented one training morning at Bad Zwischenahn, where 28 volunteer pilots witnessed 3 fatal accidents. 21 immediately withdrew, leaving only 7 willing to continue. Pilots wore PVC acid-proof flight suits as their only protection, but T-Stoff could leak through seams. Aircraft sometimes combusted spontaneously on the tarmac. The expression among pilots was that to return with fuel unspent invited death. American bomber crews described the Me-163 with a mixture of awe and confusion. Colonel Avelin Tacon Jr. of the 359th Fighter Group provided one of the most vivid accounts. Their bank was about 80 degrees in this turn, but they only changed course about 20 degrees. I estimate conservatively they were doing between 500 and 600 miles per hour. B-17 gunners found the tiny bat-winged shapes essentially untrackable. The turrets could not slew fast enough. Bomber crews noted the white exhaust plume as the Comet's signature, and its disappearance signalled the moment of maximum danger, when the pilot was making an unpowered attack pass. The Allies quickly identified the Comet's Achilles heel. Its 7.5-minute endurance made it operationally predictable. Planners simply routed bombers around Brandis's 25-mile combat radius. Strategic bombing of propellant factories did the rest. Captain Eric Brown, the legendary Royal Navy test pilot who flew 487 aircraft types, became the only non-German to fly a powered Me-163 in an unauthorized flight at Husum around May 1945. He reached 32,000 feet in 2 minutes 45 seconds. The noise it made was absolutely thunderous, he recalled, and it was like being in charge of a runaway train. Everything changed so rapidly, and I really had to have my wits about me. His verdict captured the Comet's essential paradox, probably more lethal to its pilots than to its enemies. A tool of desperation, but a delight to fly. The final tally demands honesty. 9 confirmed kills, rigorously cross-referenced against Allied loss records. 16 claimed. Approximately 14 Comets lost from all causes. Of roughly 370 built, fewer than 50 were ever simultaneously operational. By September 1944, just 11 were serviceable. The concentration of all Comets at a single base, a decision by Colonel Gordon Golob that overrode Spate's dispersal plan, made tactical avoidance trivially easy. Allied bombers simply flew around Brandis. The very fuel plants the Comets were meant to defend could not produce enough propellant to keep them flying. The production context adds a darker dimension. Me-163 components were manufactured using forced labour from subcamps of the Flossenburg concentration camp. A Komet now at the National Museum of the United States Air Force was found during restoration to contain stones wedged between fuel tanks and support straps, placed there by forced French workers who also wrote defiant messages inside the fuselage. Mon cœur est en chômage, one read. My heart is not occupied, a bitter pun on France's occupation. As Smithsonian curator Michael Neufeld observed, the Me-163 was not a weapon that arrived too late, but one that was too premature and flawed to have any decisive impact. A technological dead end whose point defence role would ultimately be fulfilled by surface-to-air missiles. And yet something remarkable survives. Every modern swept-wing aircraft traces a conceptual lineage to Lippisch's Delta series. The 23 degrees of wing sweep that kept the Me-163 stable at transonic speeds became standard on post-war jets. The problems Lippisch solved, how to make a tailless aircraft controllable, how to delay compressibility effects at high speed, would define the next generation of aviation. The men who flew the Komet knew exactly what they were climbing into. They knew the fuel could dissolve them. They knew the landing might break their backs. They knew that 7.5 minutes of powered flight left no margin for error. Most of them flew anyway, not because they believed they would change the war, but because the aircraft itself was extraordinary. Brown's assessment remains the truest epitaph, a delight to fly. That was the Komet's final cruel joke. It was beautiful in the air, it was murder on the ground, and in between, for 7.5 minutes, it was the fastest thing in the sky. On that autumn morning in 1943, Josef Pöhs never knew what killed him. The T-Stoff worked too quickly for that. His friend Wolfgang Spater ordered everyone not directly involved to leave immediately. Some things should not be witnessed. The Komet was supposed to be Germany's salvation. Instead, it became a monument to what happens when revolutionary technology outpaces the ability to use it safely. 9 kills, 14 aircraft lost, an unknown number of pilots and ground crew dissolved, burned or broken. That is the lesson of the Me-163. Some weapons are more dangerous to the people who wield them, and sometimes, 8 decades later, that is exactly why we remember them.